Okay. KALASK!
Greetings, KALASK.
Greetings, the thirsty person, yes. Greetings also to entire collective harassment currently present. We have to attune the vessel to some degree. There are some problems in the communication idea. Once, as you're aware, your communication failure in your electronics is usually an indicator of some discombobulation. First in the vessel's throat to some degree, now in the idea of your electronics, originally also in your idea of financial transfer, this whole idea, for some reason, some complications in the current direction. Now, everything as you're aware is a reflection of your current state, once obviously the vessel, otherwise also other members present, and currently the interaction, now transitioning over to any other further topics of inquiry. If you something to bring up, feel free to speak up right now. If there's something more to touch upon from our end, we will do so in another state.
Yes, KALASK, I just wanted to know if you had any messages for me or anything you wanted to say to me this morning.
Perhaps more it gets. We currently have nothing further to share. We're aware that you have some losing in the idea of this engaging in your current physical direction with certain entities in some what you consider a time frame, but still present energetically in your field. But again, it's something perhaps more someone of the same species, Faraday can touch upon to a greater degree. We're also aware the vessel has been in a similar state to perhaps somewhat longer, but that was also due to interaction with a certain entity of their species. Again, those are all things it's first better to interact it with the kitty cats.
All right, thank you very much. So did you have any messages or a beginning statement today?
We shared mostly what we are want to share last direction with the Rhine person considering your current political upheaval, so there's not much more to touch upon in this particular endeavor. So there's nothing further to elaborate in that direction. Unless there's someone who has a general idea or general topic or interest that's more for the group than for them personally, then we can elaborate there.
Okay, great. I'll just start with the queue then. So first, Casper, you're up.
Greetings, KALASK.
Yes, we're aware.
Could I speak to Klakul?
One moment. KALASK. Greetings.
Greetings, Klako.
Correct.
I've been feeling your energy several times since we spoke last month, and I find your energy very alluring. And can you sense or tell me why I feel so drawn to you?
Yes. First and foremost, as you're aware, you are perhaps more aligned with, well, the opposite end of the spectrum of your energy that you're currently processing. You're perhaps from your own species more aligned to feminine energy in general compared to the masculine that you're currently physically incarnated in compared to your gender. Then I am of a certain species that, however, is encompassing energies that are usually more from your own species perceived on the masculine side compared to the feminine. Understand that? So insulting or strange to me. It's just the idea how your species processes energy. I'm still very much of a feminine nature, just another species that appears different. Like, for example, an elephant might also appear to you differently, both males and females to a great degree, compared to your general gender, or a feline entity would perhaps also appear more on the line of feminine energy, no matter the gender, etc. I get those concepts, and perhaps due to me being, well, of a species, and then, however, of a feminine nature or feminine orientation in my own kind, I'm perhaps more on the fringes of what you consider perhaps more integratable energies from your own vantage point, from where you're coming from.
Okay, so it's not because we share a mutual oversoul or have been together in other incarnations or anything like that?
First and foremost, your general concepts of what you're considering incarnation, peril, etc., is to some degree correct in general in your species. However, it also to some degree oversimplified, or in other cases more complicated. Well, the idea being you are simply creating connections to other entities in the cosmos, right? That are connected through what you might term an oversoul due to your own frequency radiation. Remember, there can be no past or future incarnations because everything is the present, so you can also have a parallel incarnation. And since everything is a reflection, you can't have a parallel incarnation that you don't actively create a connection to. That's also why I don't advise anybody to dwell on any other incarnation they consider past, present, or future in any species unless it's somewhat relevant to their current incarnation, right? If you dwell on those, you just distract yourself from your current world. However, if you learn a lesson, then they will also benefit from you, but they will also become more likely if you focus on them to be your incarnations at past, present, or future. You can't really fully grasp the concept as long as you're incarnated in your current body, in your current world. It only becomes more understandable once you're out of body. So it's not much I can share with you. It would make sense, coherent sense to your intellectual mind. However, there are certainly also the possibility to have an incarnation in your own species walking right next to you that's somewhat connected to your own oversoul. But then obviously that would also not be a past or future incarnation of yourself. That's just another version from what you would call an oversoul, if you wish. Again, those concepts of oversouls, etc., from your word is often used in a misunderstanding manner. Nothing wrong with it if you like to play with those words. However, I highly advise you only using energies from out here if they benefit you in your life down there. But then again, I'm just sharing frequency and information. If you want to use it for one thing or the other, I don't really care. I just observe you as you interact with the energy I'm sharing. And I'm learning also from interacting with your species. It's just something I recommend for your own benefit.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. That's kind of strange. I hope I don't accidentally push you or Sihar out of incarnation by not focusing enough on you, so that you suddenly become a present that doesn't exist. But anyway, does your race or species have a name, like the KALASK, for instance?
first and foremost, it doesn't work the way that you stop thinking of somebody and stop existing. You would just no longer be able to perceive me. I would stop existing in any way, shape, or form in your reality. You would no longer be on those interactions where I would be present and vice versa. You would no longer be able to receive me. Ultimately, you would forget I ever existed, etc., etc. But I would still exist the way that I am, or any other kind out there. It's just that there would no longer be a connection. Last as if you would forget that you have a distant brother or something similar. They would not stop existing, they would just stop existing in your reality. What you consider solipsism in your world is quite a best description of, in general, your understanding of how the world works, but it works for each individual differently. Each individual has their own reality bubble, so to speak, but they can overlap, and once they overlap, you have a co-creation to influence each other, and you have an understanding of the other person, no matter if it's another species or your own species, or if that's over your internet or telepathy or physically present in front of you. The other person will either vanish from your life, and therefore your understanding of who and what they are will vanish, not them as a person. Just as you will ultimately vanish from their understanding because it's mutual, but that doesn't mean that they would not exist in the perception of other individuals. So therefore, you see, from your physical incarnation, there's a different perception than from what you would then consider an oversoul. And furthermore,
Yes.
our species does not use a name. No.
Okay. Yes, and yes, I figured that you wouldn't actually literally disappear. It was kind of a joke.
Yes, so it's for general explanation. Anybody listening in.
Thank you. So, is your heart chakra open or closed down like on KALASK?
Perhaps not quite as closed. Comparatively, our species is somewhat lighter, I guess, on your understanding of light and darker frequencies. In our species, we don't really use those terms. We have other definitions of strengths and weaknesses, etc. Our dichotomies are not based on what you consider light and dark. So therefore, also something concerning emotionality is usually not considered to be something of our kind. That's not something to focus on, but from your perspective, I probably would be considered more open-hearted.
Okay. And I'm thinking, how does it affect me when I connect when I connect energetically with you? Because it feels really good while I do it, but I think I tend to feel a bit more anger the days after. So is that because it's helping me to resolve my own suppressed anger and darkness, or is it some of your darkness merely rubbing off on me so that I become darker?
Just as previously explained, everything is a reflection, so whatever you perceive of me is a reflection of what you're pulsing out and vice versa, so both is true. You are indeed becoming darker, as you're calling it, by becoming more inclined with my frequency, with my energy. You're picking up more from me and my own character, etc. But this obviously also brings out an aspect of you that is yourself, right? That's why you come back to your previous question that I explained on length. And therefore aspects of you emerge that are in frequency alignment with those aspects of mine that you then perceive as rising anger.
Okay.
Which I would not necessarily consider a bad thing.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, it's certainly helpful. You just need to process it.
Yeah. Okay.
And express it. Don't suppress your anger. Don't worry about other individuals in your society, what think of you, etc. All of those ideas, understand there's a big thing in your world. And over in our society, in our species in general, the social conduct is very important. Cohesion and honor is very high regarded. However, in your society, there's largely disconduct, dishonor, and a lot of chaos. And therefore, I would not recommend anybody in your species to try to adapt to a sick society, as you call it such, correct? Also, the idea of being aligned with your own species is not necessary, since your species is very well on a path of self-destruction currently, in a general idea. So therefore, if you feel arrogant anger about any individuals, it's mostly wiser to express it, not just in your own species in general, also towards me or anybody else, because you cannot really resolve anything if you try to suppress it at all. Whether it's good or bad, or anger or whatever, but you also learn, you also understand that as a learning lesson, if you express anger, if you don't do it, it's not that you are doing anybody a favor, at least yourself. You're doing people a disfavor if you're not being expressive with your honest anger and sensation. We have our own problems with those ideas of emotionality. For us, it's more like what you consider love or affection that we don't express in such a manner. It's considered, well, unacceptable in society. Perhaps like you, if you would throw a hissing fit in a supermarket and start throwing packages around, it's probably considered an unnecessary or uninvolved expression of anger. The same way if somebody like us would go around and hug other people, that would be considered an affront and perhaps a problem, unless it's a very close relationship, like for sex or sexual, otherwise would be considered strange or outright antisocial. Ironically, we understand your definition would be the opposite. However, your understanding is obviously the opposite, that you have the understanding of anger being unnecessary or an affront to other people if you express anger to them. That is not something we recommend in any species. We understand it's more common in yours, but again, over here, it is certainly not recommended at all. And I would certainly recommend you also take over those aspects from us and express your anger and let the other person learn the lesson that you express anger to, and learn your own lesson from the reflection that you're getting by expressing it.
Yeah, but it's just that I really don't like when other people are angry and aggressive and hostile towards me. So I'm finding it would be unfair for me to then be those things towards other people.
Why would you not like that?
Why would I not like that? Because it feels terrible. It feels like, it feels frightening and uncomfortable and like nobody loves me and like just terrible.
It's very peculiar.
Yeah, I suppose from somebody who's used to that and don't like the love thing, I assume it must be peculiar.
It's very strange. Don't you understand you can evolve without conflict?
No. In our society, we think more that we evolve if we're just nice and kind and loving to everybody because it feels so good when people are compassionate and loving.
Are you?
Am I compassionate and loving? Was that your question?
How come you have anger if your species is often very conflicting in your own presentation? That's something I've noticed since I interacted with your kind. You're often very conflicting in your expression of who and what you are. You do one thing on the outside, another thing on the inside. One of you is like this, another is like that. We have more cohesion over here. We might not appear nice to the beings, or whatever that means, to whatever species, but we are more or less in conjunction with each other, and expressing anger is something that's very socially acceptable.
Yes. Well, I mean, over here, expressing anger is only half and half acceptable. I suppose somebody accept it. Personally, I feel that when people express anger, they ought to just go to another planet or discarnate or something like that. But I can't know for sure how other people feel, but it's definitely a bit confusing to be human because we also easily get upset if somebody does or says the wrong thing. Our emotion can like play with us.
Yes, I would recommend you play with them rather than the other way around. That's the problem we have understood with emotionality. Some others more extreme than our kind, like the KALASK group, for example, and others even more so, which is why emotion has been considered a bad thing, because it can take you over and then you lose control. Like you, for example, when you overdose on certain substances, like your alcohol, and you lose control, that's why emotion has been considered intoxifying.
Yeah. Okay. There's just one last question or two I would like to ask you. Is there anything you would suggest me to do in order to improve my health or create better connectivity to the astral worlds?
Yes, certainly. Express your anger.
Okay. So you think that would improve my health?
Certainly. You're certainly uninvolved sometimes with your physical world because you disassociate with your own identity and your own form, because you jump out of body, because you're not being direct with your surrounding. Your sacral and more so your solar plexus are certainly affected by such.
Okay, interesting.
Yes, also, you have another law in your world. You consider it to be a good idea not to do things to others that you don't want to be done to yourself. But I would suggest it's also a good idea to do to others the way that in the right moment seems the right expression, and because not everybody in your world especially wants the same thing.
Yes. Okay. Well,
So, for example, perhaps a nicer example, you perhaps don't like strawberry ice cream, but somebody doesn't. And then, well, somebody you know that likes strawberry ice cream, but you would never buy them a strawberry ice cream because you would not do something to them that you don't like.
Yeah, true. But I don't think anybody here on Earth likes anger and hostility and people being unpleasant to them. I think everybody would like love and compassion.
Perhaps.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm just about out of time. So, how would you prefer to be wished farewell? Because I know that if I say stuff like much love and appreciation to the KALASK race, it's likely to give them acute emotion sickness. And the last thing I want to do is to cause a reptile dysfunction by choosing my words poorly. So, what is a fitting farewell?
Yes, a very funny expression of reptile dysfunction. Now, there are deer being. First and foremost, I'm female, but I'm a reptile, so yes, I understand still your reference. However, the point being, if there's another entity present, they can speak up also to my interaction, and I leave you, otherwise you particularly, with much anger and honesty. And honesty is always something appreciated in our kindness, perhaps a more neutral expression.
Well, then much strength, appreciation, and honesty to you, Flacco. Bye.
Goodbye. If there are no further inquiries from any other entities, I will connect back to KALASK.
If there are none, much conflict and honesty to you as well. Thank you.
KALASK!
Hey, greetings, KALASK.
Hey, greetings, the right person once again, yes.
Yeah, so like the most questions, like the main topic that I wanted to talk about today is about World War III. I know there's like a bunch of, different timelines and a bunch of different options, but, like the timeline or whatever that you were talking to us about like last month, like you said South Africa would probably go to war against the Northeast. Like by Northeast, first of all, do you mean like Egypt?
The Horn of Africa.
Okay.
So
So
not
like
Egypt further down south, below the Gulf.
do you know the name of the country that you're talking about?
Well, not necessarily one country, there might be several. The individual present are at times the richer person, somewhere is located in some region.
Okay.
Around the world, suggesting there's like Kenya, Somalia, but in general, Gambia, those particular countries in the Horn of Africa, they might form alliance. They're also like going to be different tribes fighting each other, right? There might be a race war, as you're calling such in South Africa, between white farmers and blacks. Are more likely, eventually, there will be a stronger force in general where they fight together, also against other tribes than many African tribes that consider themselves opposed to each other in different countries will fight. Also, different countries in the whole African continent would likely fight, and eventually the Southern Africans would likely get help from outside. And then with that help, they would plow through northwards in their conflict, particularly with some alliance from northeastern Africa, the Horn of Africa, or remember, we are sharing frequencies, we see energy, not individual soldiers with guns in their hands, right?
Okay, whenever you say South Africa, do you mean like literally the country named South Africa, or just like an alliance of countries in the South?
Those, first and foremost, this country, South Africa. However, likely it will quickly overrun others like Rhodesia, etc., or first to Zimbabwe all the way, right? So it's very likely that others would join. So first and foremost, the actual country, South Africa, but then numerous other countries would quickly be submerged under the country during such larger conflict. Same in other region of the planet where there's energy moving from one place to another again, might be Russia or China moving westward, etc. Those details are as uncertain as it gets. More certain is the energy moving in one direction or the other.
Okay. And what did you mean about the North Sea, like flooding most of the United Kingdom and parts of mainland Europe? Like, what would cause it to flood these areas?
Nuclear attack.
So you mean like a nuke would be set off in the middle of the sea, which would cause a flood?
Yes, not necessarily the middle of the fleet, not near Helgoland, more closer to the English. Therefore, also England being great is the fact that very close to the English, very close to the London region.
Okay, but I mean, would the waters just recede eventually and like people would rebuild kind of like with the Japan tsunami? I mean, like why would the whole area be destroyed?
Well, there would like to be more bombs and nukes on the English continent, also especially London as we shared. Again, all of those things are possibilities. They could happen differently. This is just a current likely scenario. It can all change. It's malleable, just like your current corona crisis, Sarah, you're currently creating a second wave, your choice or not. Then the idea being, there would also like to be more bombs in the Northern Sea, depends greatly, likely being to be joint effort by German and Russian alliance. German alliance are being likely under a subjugation at the point because they're occupied by a Russian force, if it comes to that. Now the idea being, well, the French also being likely aligned at this point, more voluntarily, however, but mainly this being mainly a Russian-led alliance that would likely inflict such an attack. They will also like be counterattack, however, mostly if there's a flood wave, it's going to be in the region over there, like a tsunami, however, then the whole structure of the peninsulas used for the nukes might also be affected to the degree that similar to Atlantis would sink. Not necessarily the whole area, but likely England, Wales, Scotland is likely going to stay afloat, however, also being severely affected. Ireland being somewhat affected by wave, but most of it would be taken by the country or the region in the United Kingdom you're calling England.
Okay.
Again, all just possibilities that might happen is somewhat different.
Okay. Well, I want to save some time for Metax, so this will be my last question for today. But like for the last like at least 5 years, I've been hearing China, talking about possibly invading Taiwan. Do you see that happening like anytime in the near future?
Well, if it comes to the major war, yes, definitely. But not just Taiwan, also many other regions, also Thailand, Indonesia, this whole area, Persia all the way to Singapore. They would likely want to, similar to Japan in your last war, major war, annex Asia more or less for their own territorial interests, at least those that are somewhat been affiliated previously, particularly in those countries like immediately south beneath.
Okay. Okay, well, Chrissy just said I have 10 more minutes, so okay, awesome. Well, like
yes,
another
one more side note. If there's war starting, additionally, if it is likely going to start in a Russia against civil war scenario in the European area, perhaps somewhere around the border to Ukraine or the Caucasus.
Okay. Yeah, like you'd mentioned that before, and I thought that was kind of weird because, like Russia, they tried to invade, not directly, but like they more or less tried to invade Ukraine, like in 2014. They stole Crimea, and then like in the Donbass region of Ukraine, like Russia, they had soldiers that they didn't have like Russian flags on their arms, but I mean everybody knows it was really Russia that invaded the area. but like they got their asses kicked there. So it's like I was thinking to myself, like, man, if they can't even invade and conquer, even parts of Ukraine, like how are they going to conquer the rest of Europe? So I mean, like, how do you expect this invasion to take place? Is it just going to be like, I don't know, some like kind of like Germany invading Poland, or are they going to like do some surprise nuclear attack like right from the get-go, or what?
Very likely, before any invasion, in the area that they have annexed, right? Or it's somewhat of an uncertain area, likely there's going to be civil unrest starting there. So it's not that Russia blasts through immediately, it's more likely there will civil unrest start in the region, right? Also, in the Caucasus region, very likely, it's also possible that some of the Turkish groups there would start some upheaval and some conflict with the Russian natives there. As you have some terrorist attacks in Europe, but much different in the region, it will likely be received differently. The reaction will be differently than your Western Hemisphere. Also, due to your current implementation of the changes of their constitution, which we are aware in your own time frame will take place in approximately about 2 months or 1.5 months. There also might be uncertainty among the natives. Likely there would be a civil war before any invasion that would kill a massive amount of people, and that would likely lead to China stepping in, possibly. Also the rise of the Soviet Union, therefore a re-implementation of a Chinese-Russian connectivity like you do to your era Stalin Mao, therefore forming a larger alliance that would then, if you will, be a new Soviet Union, and that new country would then likely lash out.
Okay. So like on June 15th, China, there was like some short, like a battle between India and China, like right on their border, and like roughly 20 Indian soldiers were killed, and like roughly 20 Chinese soldiers were killed. So like, do you think, like, basically, what do you think India's role is going to be in World War III? Do you think there's going to be some conflict with them in China?
They will likely join the West, while Pakistan or some neighboring countries will join the East. We will more or less have two factions, just like many Arab countries might join the West and others might join the East. So likely the Indian border conflicts and quarrels with our neighboring countries would also likely be divided in, more or less every country that's spread will likely have to choose either side or get overrun and then be forced to take the side of those that have overrun them.
Okay. And you mentioned that, like, in South America, there's going to be some proxy war. I know, like, Venezuela is socialist and is very much allied with China, but I mean, like, that's just one little weak country. Like, it seems like every other country in South America is more or less like friends of the West. So, like, who do you think, like, what countries do you think are going to be fighting in South America?
But the Cuba country, most likely, well, Mesoamerica, etc., then there's simply civil war cropping up, right? Their idea is simply coup d'etat, where there are simply groups that are trying to take over a country, like your country, the United States, has been doing for quite a while since it's get a monopoly, so to speak, on those particular infiltration methods, which are now employed also by Eastern countries like Russia and China. Again, we have a general understanding of military strategy, and we're just employing those ideas, understanding those ideas on your own planet, right? With your own factions. We aren't familiar as much with your own structures, individual countries, etc., but the military strategy much more so. And here it's very clear that those particular implementations of those methods of subjugation, state revolution, etc., are being instigated also by those countries you consider communist, and also Russia is doing it well to some degree, as they're also getting more under Chinese influence. And obviously also depends when in your time frame, as you're calling it, or frequency-wise, how powerful the Chinese and the Russian alliance would be at the time, and how powerful the United States alliance and its NATO ally would still be at the time, since they're rising and you're sinking. So it's more likely going to start at a point where you reach the pet situation.
Okay. Oh, what situation?
Well, we're using a word for vessels. Well, but you have a 50-50 chance, the idea of being more eye to eye.
Okay. All right. What do you think is going to happen to, like, you said the United States will become the divided states? I mean, like, would like whatever it splits into, would they still be under the control of like basically the same groups, the Illuminati and Freemasons?
But very general terming, the Freemasons, especially in the United States, are very powerful, so they likely would be remaining powerful. Perhaps they would control one half and the other half would be controlled by somebody else. Or, I understand, in your human societies, you have this democratic idea or fantasy, or perhaps an idea in your species at least, that the people can rule themselves. It's a very strange concept, but nonetheless, it's an idea that's very precious to many of your peoples. Or ultimately, there's always some form of elite in charge, usually on your planet, if you call it democracy. So it's unlikely that you would have one half of the United States where the people, so to speak, are in charge. The other half, it's the Freemasonic groups. Likely there would be an elite in one half and an elite in another half, for example, like you had in your Civil War, right? Where you have two different governments sending troops at war with each other. You could perhaps have another split like such, and then you have a North and South again, just for example. And you have two different groupings, perhaps Freemasonic ones or otherwise in their personal faction of what you would consider Illuminati. They're usually calling themselves like that for what we are aware. However, different groupings with different interests, perhaps one being then aligned more politically or religiously or other fact. And then you have people also moving from one side to the other, for example, after such a conflict. Of course, also might be that during an invasion, some might side with the invaders, others do not, etc. Then they could be considered traitors after the war, etc. So there could be also deportation. All kinds of scenarios are possible, really. Most importantly, once the invasion or attempted invasion has happened and it's been thwarted, right? Your country would likely be weakened to a greater degree, and then also, as you might be familiar, once there's weakening of a central government, then everything's possible, really, and all the groups that exist right now, or at least some of them, might simply become more powerful, decide that they want their own government, and then, of course, the top of their government would likely be manipulated, and then, of course, groupings that you consider Illuminati or whether fact certain bankers and certain Freemasonic sects would likely try to take the top over once again, and, of course, there also being such as us out here, right? Not we have much interest, particularly as a kind, to your particular country, or certain beings would likely also make an invitation to other groupings on Earth that split off. Well, now you're free from them, but now you need support from out here, etc. All of those things are possible, but there are always going to be some elite in charge, whether it's your current Freemasonic sect or somebody else.
Okay. All right. Well, my time is up for today, so thanks for answering my questions, KALASK. I do have a lot more, but yeah, I'll save it to next time. Thanks. Talk to you later. Strength and honor.
Strength, honor, and certainty as much as you can in your current confusing times.
Thanks.
Water for the vessel.
Hi, KALASK.
Great, Sven.
How are you keeping on?
Hydration. Now, clearer, yes?
Yes.
Very well. Do you have any more specific inquiry or I don't know our current state of being, as it's usually from our perspective, as they're speaking to your kind, obviously aligned to your own frequency, otherwise we wouldn't be here.
Yes. I have a question for you. If everything, as you said in one of your speeches, if everything depends on perception, then if something is not perceived at all, does it still exist? Say, does my living room exist while I'm not home and nobody's looking at it?
Well, there's, well, not the possibility. Everything is perceived by something at some point in some way. So everything exists, everything anybody can imagine exists. So it's not that you are looking at with your eyes, right? But with your perception. When you mention your living room, right? You have an idea of it in your mind, just as you speak. Therefore it exists. only if you would forget that it exists totally, and everybody else too, then it would not exist. But it's literally not possible in your current universal experience, because everything is always somehow perceived by something in some way, shape, or form. So theoretically, yes, but practically, no.
I'm loving the answer. Yes. And if several entities are perceiving the same thing differently, so they are just getting different results in their perception. And there is, well, basically it's a question, is there really such thing as objective reality, even from the, if it's not a living object, a living entity, if it's just an object, can it exist without being perceived? No, as I understand.
It does not exist at all without the perception of somebody or something. Or its self-perception is also perception. So therefore, there's really no such thing as inorganic matter. There's always some form of life form in everything. Nothing is real without some form of attachment to life. That's what makes it so. From your perception, however, you don't see the small atoms that make everything up, for example, with your own eyes, but you know they're there due to your scientific elaboration. Or much smaller than the atom is the energy itself that's permeating everything. So in some way, shape, or form, everything is perceived. But you're correct, there is no such thing as objective reality. But you need to believe that there's an objective reality in order to have an experience in your physical world at all. Otherwise, you would literally have everything fall apart around you. Like you have some of your sci-fi movies where a personal character that altered the past or something, and then it doesn't literally work that way, but theoretically, and then suddenly their car disappears because they changed something in the past or something similar, right?
Yeah, such thing exists. Yeah, such concept.
Yes. It doesn't happen like that something disappears right in front of your eye, because again, it's your mind that's sending it out. It wouldn't disappear. You would forget that it exists or it has ever existed. You wouldn't even think, where did this go? You would not even remember it as having been there. Now, I'm aware we're perceiving in your own species, there's the idea of what you consider a Mandela effect, or it's not an idea that you're just having a different perception of what you consider a past event. It doesn't do with the individual person, by the way. It's just the idea that something has been differently perceived, apparently, in the past than in the future. But the point is, you're perceiving it from who you are right now, since there is no time frame, right?
Yeah.
So therefore, your perception is what makes things either in past, future, or present be a certain way. So if you have no perception of them, they simply have never existed. They don't disappear. Your living room doesn't disappear if you forget it exists. It has never existed. There was no living room to begin with.
Yeah, listen, it's great explanation. I like pondering about those type of things sometimes.
Yes, we can tell. You can certainly put your faith in a frenzy and drive yourself insane, as you're calling such. Yes. But as we mentioned previously,
I find it entertaining.
Yes, certainly. You can also catapult yourself out of your current perception of reality, and then you can experience what some people in your world have considered, well, a fourth dimensional experience, something similar or essential or fact. That's not really something that changes you because you suddenly are a different person. You just have a better understanding. Like if you just suddenly learn how to speak a language, you suddenly have another understanding of a whole layer of information you have previously no access to.
Yes, I think I'm familiar with this type of feeling. It's like Metax said that the attribute is changing without changing the location.
Yes, or rather the location, as we also explained in our telepathic exercise, the location is nothing else but an attribute of a certain object. Therefore, if you want to move an object from one to the other, you don't take the object and move it, you change the attribute of the object, therefore that it is an object in that location. In other words, the location changes, not the object, the location being just an attribute of the object, correct?
You mean the object stays, well, it stays and does not. I change the attribute of the object in my perception, therefore it's changing in my perception.
Yes, instead of taking an object from the cupboard and placing it on the table, you change the perception of the object of being an object that's lying on the cupboard to the perception of object that's lying on the table, and then it appears there.
Yes.
But paradoxically, as there's no time, it has always been there. You just perceive the object as something that is somewhere else. But from your perception, you would then experience that it hasn't changed places, but in reality, you're just now perceiving another time frame in reality where it has always been there.
And if there is somebody else looking at this, they would perceive it too. Or I would perceive them perceiving it.
Right, you would perceive them perceiving it. The version of them that you're perceiving is the version that's also perceiving it. But there's another version of them that you're not perceiving that is not perceiving it, but they're not existing in your reality because they're not partaking in your experience.
Those details are the ones I was thinking about recently.
Yes, certainly it's an interesting concept to elaborate on that will help you understand higher dimensionality.
I actually find it it's funny and interesting. It's kind of something like a mind candy, if you can say it like that.
Yes, or a mind fuck.
Yes, what a mind fuck. Probably it's not for you. Probably for you, it's you. Do you find it still interesting, or for you it's like a normal thing?
It's interesting when species like yours are coming to the realization of how those concepts work. Yes.
It's like getting out of the paper bag.
Yes, or out of the box, as you're saying. Yes.
Yes. But like, if I'm perceiving the person perceiving it, where is the actual essence of the person located at this moment? Of there is no such thing. They're just floating all kinds of versions of that.
Well, there's no such thing as a location of the person, because what you consider locality is also just an attribute, not just of the object you're placing on the table, but also the person. Nobody, not even yourself, is anywhere at any place unless you are changing or defining the attribute of you being somewhere, like, for example, your non-existent living room, right?
Yeah.
So therefore, in your so-called physical material world, that we are also still a part of to some degree, right? We define, or you define, your current presence there as an attribute of who and what you are. If you would take away the definition of a certain locality, or the attribute of an individual, or a being, or an entity, or an object, completely away, so to speak, that you're perceiving at all, they would be non-physical. That is the non-physical. Just remove the attribute of being somewhere from something, and it has no physical existence. Physical existence is nothing but a projection of the non-physical, and therefore from that projection, a part of that projection is the attribute that you consider locality. Like in computer programs, and you create a character, right?
Yeah.
You create a character, you choose their hair or their fur color, and their dressing, their armor, right? Also creating the rejected person. The whole idea being here, you choose a character, and then you place it in the game, and then it exists in the game. But then you would ask yourself, well, if I do not create the character and the game is over, where is the character now? Where is it located? Is it in my computer screen somewhere hidden? It doesn't even exist in the game because it's not currently created. The current attribute of being in the game being played does not exist. It's not a part of the character currently. Therefore, the character doesn't have different hair color, different skin color, fur color, or different armor, whatever, doing something somewhere. It's certainly currently not there present, but it can be summoned at any time from, well, the non-game area, you sitting in front of the computer screen, or in case of physical reality, from the non-physical blueprint.
It's very good explanation. Are they self-aware in non-physical area or not? They are, no?
It's similar to, well, the best concept we have for it, right, is your dream world currently. From where you currently are. That's usually the area where you are. So there it is self-conscious more than is in your physical reality. The physical reality is just, the game area. Is your playable character, so to speak, as conscious of the game as you are? No, because they're unaware they are playing a game. So actually, when you're in non-physical, you're more aware than when you are in the physical.
Because you are everything, right? You are not limited with attributes.
There are still attributes that are limited to some degree, but not nearly as much as the physical, from what we are understanding. Again, we're also speaking from our own vantage point. But from what you currently perceive as limitations, they're all gone, yes. But you're not one with the source, so to speak, unless you're moving also to that direction there are still some limitation depending how much you decide to identify yourself with one thing rather than the other. But that's also entirely up to definition. As you're aware, further you go in frequency, there's not only light or only dark, there's more of an understanding of higher energies that are neither one or the other, etc. So there's less of limitation because of the understanding of the dichotomy and the unnecessity to have this in higher dimensionality, but there are still other definitions that can be limiting. But again, those limits would not even be understandable for your current physical presence.
Listen, it's amazing explanation. I love this. Thank you so much.
Very welcome.
Thanks for satisfying my curiosity.
Certainly, we appreciate curiosity, much like the kitty cats are. In our case, we also appreciate sharing certain intellectual information with your species, much easier than trying to relate emotionality. And from intellectual understanding, you also learn from us to a greater degree than perhaps from entities in your own planet that are more confused. And we certainly are also learning more from interacting with your species and seeing how you interrelate with higher level of learning courses.
Thank you. Much appreciation to you, Kalask.
Much appreciation to you, and obviously, strength neural.
For you too.
Can you get water for the vessel, please?
Yes. Somewhat better.
All right, Jacob, you're up next.
Hello, class.
Greetings, Jacob person, yes. Which mentioned you previously if you were aware in your current direction is yours also the interest in your computer game characters in your explanation of parallel worlds.
Right, yeah. Well, that was a good analogy. Yeah, I was actually using that for a bit, to be a little more conductive in the early stages to the feline energy, because it was just a quick way to, you could create characters, and then I could just make the characters at least resemble the ones out there. So I've been
Yes.
a little bit more conductive to your energy in particular. You kind of came through just sort of, well, it just seemed like out of nowhere for me, but just all of a sudden I just had this interest in your energy that I wasn't really expecting, and it's been very loud and pronounced. And you know, I see you a lot on Mars, like at least when you're based on Mars. I'm not sure why you picked that planet in particular instead of Thuban, but well, no one in Thuban. But is there any comments you want to make on just that in particular, on Mars, being on Mars, and what I'm doing there?
Well, we're based on there, your current reality, there are still some remnants left, or the idea being Thuban is what you're considering locality-wise further away from your understanding, right? So therefore, we simply prefer to have a base right there and there, because easier, and even though we could travel instantly, they are still easier to be in that physical presence in your own solar system, to have perception, observation. There's another one around Jupiter. Or much of this threats to the reptilian politics, but yes, there are still some observational posts on there. If you have more interest in Thuban, sure, but there's also even trading more in the reptilian politics than an outpost, so to speak, where you're also very centrist compared to considering your own planet being like the most central, best perceivable version of your own understanding of livable conditions, or you're just located on the fringes, right, of the galaxy, so therefore it's an outpost, and in our case, an outpost around your own solar system or planet Mars again, run more further around the Jupiter, around the moon, and obviously with our space travel capacities, we can easily jump from one point to the other, also with what you previously explained to the another person in terms of changing the locality of an object like a spaceship, for example, but nonetheless, it's still easier for individuals to travel physically from point A to point B if we want to have, more of a patrol area, right? More an observation, not getting overtly well, jumping in between back and forth, right, can also have an effect on the physical form. So therefore, we prefer to have a more hands-on approach by having a physical presence in your solar system.
Right. Well, okay. Well, it's just been asking because, in particular, there, I'm not sure. Seems to be something that more resembles like maybe an arena or something like that, or a dojo or something similar, I guess, that you have there. And I suppose from connecting to your energy, it's sort of lifting a lot of unconscious sort of emotions that I've been feeling. And because, like, I don't know, as I've been explaining before in the prior months, just to a lot larger, significant of a degree now, but like when I feel the blockage or something, if I just simply acknowledge that it's there for a reason, then I can see the thing that's blocking it. And as I've been telling with like the felines, is that it's very often just a fear of it, because it's like a very intense energy. And then, I don't want to acknowledge that consciously, so I just start drifting off to other things. And then it's confusing why it seems counterintuitive for me to not be conductive to it. And simply from that vantage point, is that something that you're seeing as well?
Well, could you get more into detail?
Okay. I suppose wanting to be the person I desire, especially the person that I am a lot more conductive to when I'm with you guys, is very intimidating, I suppose, and it has been for a long time to me, unconsciously, without realizing it was intimidating. And I was always confused. So, okay, why can't I just be that person right now? And now I'm just saying, oh, right, because there's a big jump in energy that's going to happen, and it scares the shit out of me, and that's why I'm not conductive to it.
You are making a decision that it scares the shit out of you, right? Because your conscious mind needs to have this process, because again, remember, there is no time frame, so therefore you are not shifting from A to point B through going through a process. You're just redefining yourself as being already at point B, but your logical mind cannot process that. Therefore, you to experience something, if you want to have an end result, right? Then you to experience something that seems extreme enough for your conscious mind to accept a new reality that's vastly different from yours for right now, correct?
Right.
If you want to have $1 billion on your bank account, right? You need to make a massive transaction. If you have, perhaps $1,000, right?
Right.
But you are only trained the perception of needing to make the transaction to be what you consider owner of a certain amount of wealth. Because your conscious mind needs to process that, but in reality, you just need to redefine your bank account to being $1 million, for example. But your conscious mind can't process it like that. You would drive yourself insane. So therefore, you create then what you would consider a massive upheaval or a shift in the case of what you consider an energetic transition year, for which you had used humanitarian as a metaphor because it's more graspable. Now, therefore, you also create a fear based on your own perception society. Unnecessary, right? You have a certain lineage, also certain identity in your own species. We understand it's perfectly acceptable, but there is no necessity for you to identify with the limitation that come with it. You can also have the identification with being physically present without those ideas of limitations.
Right. Yeah. Well, I've noticed that it's just kind of like, I don't know, like a little bit of, I just get a little bit anxious about just completely just detaching from everything I'm doing. But at the same time, I know that I'm going to have to make that decision anyway. And well, I want to. It's just like, that I guess that's the thing that's stemming the fear in the first place. Well, I suppose there's this point where I become like in this sort of more of a serene sort of baseline utilitarian sort of state of mind, where I can kind of just see what desires I can grasp onto and what drives that I have, like emotionally, to think about, and that I can just simply use those as a tool to get the sufficient energy to push forward. And it's very weird to just be from that outside perspective and seeing which desires have the most mass to them that can be more conductive to integrating, which is
Just
strange.
focus on our frequency. There's no need to intellectually remove yourself from the experience, to disassociate. You can be in the present moment and experiencing it full force on. If you're in tune our frequency, remember the artwork, the eyes, the symbols, etc., all tools, very possible. Of course, listen to our speaking helps and align to our frequency, and then just go with it through the energy. If you want to fully experience our frequency, then what you experience or create as an upheaval is necessary simply because your conscious mind needs to adapt to another frequency.
Right.
You need to get high on this, right?
Right. Yeah.
Don't think that you have to go through this. It's gonna be very difficult. On the other side, there's KALASK. No, the idea is you get used to the frequency, you get high on it, you embrace it, you enjoy it, and therefore, through that enjoyment, you will be at the frequency, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I have had those pent up emotions come through. Not so much in. Well, I suppose it's just an extreme surge of willpower that comes through. It's very brief for a moment, but it's coming more frequent just as I sort of ease into it and just accept that the blockage is there for a reason. And the more it comes to surfacing the conscious mind, the more just all of a sudden, just like, oh, never mind, I don't have to do all this shit. It just immediately just comes forward, and I just get an extreme sort of momentum of energy anyway. So I suppose it's already there. It's just, yeah, the point of me just dropping all the illusions of it not existing.
Yes, correct. But again, you don't even have to drop the illusions. You just don't have to identify with them.
Right.
They will drop on their own, so to speak, once you identify with whatever it is you want to be instead, right?
Yeah, right.
And again, previously, they will never have existed.
Well, I suppose I will just leave it there. I suppose one quick question I can have, because I noticed when I was training with you, I see a lot of geometry. The two ones I saw in particular were like an inverted pyramid again, the same one I saw on Gethar, and also an infinity symbol. And I suppose I was just wondering what your perception of the felines in my connection, particularly Kang individual, how what your opinions on them are, and if you like have met him before or something like that.
Well, we haven't met them physically, right? But we're aware of their existence to some degree, and we're aware they're also on a different frequency range than we are. Personally, it's highly evolved in terms of, well, from our perception, they might have a different perception, but their idea being here, they're also more a peaceful nature, right, comparatively.
Right.
But not to the degree that they would be arbitrary, to the degree it would be disgusted. There's still some relevance, some reference point that's possible. So we could coexist or relate to some degree, yes.
Right. Yeah, their energy his energy in particular kind of just like freaks me out a little bit. It's kind of like when you see it when you're just walking outside and then just all of a sudden you just see a snake on the road or something when I was a kid, and he gives me that same sort of adrenaline surge. So I suppose you wouldn't really find him that off. You know, he wouldn't throw you off too much, I suppose.
A snake. Yes,
yeah,
or
exactly.
similar to you seeing a butterfly.
Right. Okay. Well, I think that's enough time for me now. I think I might just talk to the felines now. Appreciate the talk, KALASK.
Yes, you are welcome. Much strength, appreciation to your inquiry, and of course, much appreciation to the snake.
Strength and honor.
Any further inquiry?
I think that's all for me.
I think this is the end of the queue for KALASK. Thank you.
That's what we assumed. Until our next interaction, much appreciation for your facilitation from the Christy person, much strength, honor to the entire Monkey Collective, and we will leave it here and connect to the kitty cats.
Strength and honor to KALASK.
Patience.
Greetings, Metax.
Yes, accuracy.
Does David need some water?
Yes, that's a very good idea. Thank you for reminding. Much better.
So did you have anything you'd want to share with me today that might help?
Yes, I'm aware, first and foremost, that you experienced something that you would consider a loss of a companion, what you would call a while ago. Certain entities you might be familiar die, people and entities of any nature, any species don't stop existing. They're somewhere else, they're somewhere. Even if it sounds cliche, better usually, because your world is a tough learning ground and many entities that transition are much better off. If you wish, you can call it heaven or nirvana or any other word that you're using in your different mythologies, but overall, the entity does not have the same consciousness level as I do or many others in my kind here, but they're still the same general species, so therefore the frequency is similar enough. And there's also a certain processing of our particular energies in your current, what you would consider a year or time frame. Is aware that David, as also some others, had some other similar. It's difficult to work with David's body and this idea because I have to work in the heart and memories of losses of certain entities, particularly somebody who's now here. If you wish, you will be able to connect to the entity at some point. If you disincarnate, for example, you can of course telepathically communicate with the entity. I'm not certain if there would be the possibility to connect to it in the same manner that I can speak through David right now. However, there's certainly the possibility for me to reach out to the entity, which of course I am. There's some uncertainty on both sides, but remember you're also reflecting of each other, so if you perceive something, just trust it, that it's coming from the source that you're expecting, and then the connection is better. The more you're asking and suspecting things, the more you're cutting it, the more you're open to whatever is coming, the easier you will have a perception. Of course, you can always also connect to my frequency if you find that beneficial to connect to other entities. Of course, also Kirash and other entities out here that you have also already a connection to. Remember, since there's no time, a certain relatability, and also therefore back and forth communication over timelines from past, present, future is possible with different species and entities, including those that have apparently disincarnated from your world. However, you always need to go through the heart if you want to connect with any entities of our kind. So therefore, if you feel sadness or despair, you will likely lose the possibility of a connection, as difficult as it might sound. But if you are more in a plate of joy and connectivity, then it makes it much easier. And again, the most pros consorting to thing that I can share, and it's not just a metaphor or cliche, is that indeed There's more happiness and joy on the other side than there is on your world. Simply due
believe
to
that.
learning lessons. Yes, you're very welcome.
Yeah. Thank you. There is some pain I'm still dealing with that, and thank you for sharing that. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
And
right.
all right, Casper, you're up next.
Yes. Greetings, Metax.
Yes, I'm aware. Greetings, Casper.
I would love
I
to
will
speak to
connect.
Sihar.
Yes. Greetings.
Greetings to my favorite cat.
Very nice of you. Greetings, a peculiar human on Earth.
I don't really feel like my health is progressing in the direction I would like it to. So, do you have any insights or suggestions to help me out of this quagmire?
Well, as you're repeating the cycle of the idea of repetitive inquiries and repetitive questions in this regard, I might direct in that direction the idea of self-love that I have mentioned previously, but perhaps not as direct. The idea simply you loving your body, your physical form, right? As I mentioned, the idea simply being your entire nature that you define, that you identify as progressing or decreasing or anything or being stuck is the way it is because of the perception that you have of yourself. In other words, as long as you continue to identify as sick and waiting for something to change, you will be sick waiting for something to change. If you love yourself the way you are right now, without waiting for something to change, then you will release the energy at creating what you're considering quagmire.
Okay. Well, I will try to do more self-love then.
Yes, don't try. Love yourself in this moment. That's all.
Yeah. Okay.
No need to overcomplicate.
Yes. And then I have been practicing channeling you since last we spoke, and I'm curious to hear if you sense any progress, and also whether or not you are the only being who's attempting to be channeled through me.
Well, the idea being you're making progress in the sense that you're reaching out to more entities. That's certainly recommendable. Makes it easier. I'll still stay there, right, as a facilitator if there's somebody else wants to speak. The same way that Metax, for example, can be the facilitator. I could facilitate other entities if there's such a desire.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so I had one the other day who seemed quite angry and aggressive. Was that the Klakul or was that someone else?
You perceive the frequency likely in such a manner because of the mismatch. I'm aware that this individual, which I'm speaking a similar reaction to the reptiles. First, there was an interaction. It wasn't necessarily anger or hostility, from what I understand, but simply a mismatch of frequency that needs to be adjusted.
Yeah. Well, it was not like it was unpleasant. It was just that instead of purring and laughing that I usually sense with you, it was more like growling and a bit of aggression.
Yes, it's likely just their mode of communication. I don't find it fearful. It's just peculiar.
Yes. Okay.
But it's likely why we also have an easier time relating them compared to your human nature. We don't perceive them as dangerous, at least in our current development stage. Just their way of expression is not ours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then what would you suggest me to do if somebody comes through at some point who I don't want to channel? How do I best get them out again, so to speak?
Yes, you can simply call another entity, be that me or somebody else, asking for removal of connectivity.
Okay.
You can consider also protection shield. There are many different versions, but it really is enough if you just ask for disconnection. Or simply cut yourself off from the process immediately by closing your third eye if you're capable of doing such. But then also it might create a blockage that will keep you from interacting from me or another entity that's just more an emergency switch off.
Okay. Okay. Well, I would absolutely love your suggestion of you being kind of a moderator to also kind of help to see who goes in and out and to make sure I don't connect to somebody who's too dark for me.
Yes, I can be facilitator in that manner.
Awesome. Thank you, Sihar. And then I wanted to hear your perspective. Do you also see it as beneficial to me and my spiritual evolution to interact with the slightly darker beings like Klakol and to like show more anger and aggression in my life?
Interaction, yes, if you need to show more anger and aggression, that's dependent on the definition of such, as I mentioned. Self-love is mostly important, and if there are aspects of you that you personally identify as yourself, then certainly, no matter if they're anger or something else, you should embrace them and accept them as long as they're coming from you. As long as there's something that you perceive part of real reality, it's not a good idea to suppress or chase them away. If you need to be angry, particularly, it's not something I would necessarily dwell upon, but if there are some that crops up, it also needs to be accepted because what you remember, what you resist persists. So therefore, if you like to suppress it, you will likely just keep repeating a cycle. So embracing and loving all aspects of yourself, whether that's anger or love or anything else, is usually the best way to transmute them.
Okay. And how about the whole connecting to the reptiles? Do you see that as beneficial, or does that work counter to the whole love idea that you're suggesting?
Well, if you love yourself in the process while you're connecting to them, I don't see it counterintuitive. I could interact with them as well without I would stop loving myself. That's a very strange idea. Just because I would talk to reptiles, I would not love myself anymore. That would not be an issue.
Okay. Well, yeah. Well, it's because was kind of seeing the kind of darkness and anger as an opposition to the lightness and positivity and airy fairy thing, and so I would.
Yes, I understand this
Go
concept
into
from your
both
work. However, if you're in the process of self-love, then anything you perceive, you realize is there for a reason, and you will also appreciate it, no matter if you define it as dark or light. You don't need to identify energy in such a manner, but if you wish to have those experiences, then you could say you could love the dark.
Okay. Okay, and so it's not detrimental to me to connect to darker entities.
You
Like
identify what it is. Your perception of it alters the interaction.
Okay.
So as long as you don't make it something negative, it cannot possibly be.
Okay. Excellent.
Just remember, if you are in charge of the process and you connect to me, then there will be something like an overseer.
Yes. Excellent. Well, that sounds good, because I wanted to connect to Klakul as well. She has a really nice energy, and I have a really easy time to connecting to her energy as soon as I think of her.
Yes, I understand. You have my personal permission if you want.
Sorry, what was the last part?
You have my personal permission if you want that.
Yes, okay.
If that helps you.
Yes, well, I just wanted to make sure that I didn't move myself into some new quagmire by connecting with dark entities and becoming all dark and hostile myself. But okay, And then I think my last question will be that in a recent session, Metax told Ryan that when you manifest things out of thin air, you don't actually create it, you just teleport it in from another dimension. And so does that mean that you guys can only manifest certain things that are already here in that direction? Things that are already there in that dimension. And does that dimension then eventually run out of things because others have manifested the whole stockpile of that thing?
Well, first and foremost, the idea of quagmire again doesn't really exist outside your perception, so you create any such danger or lack thereof. So the same then with an object, transitioning here to your next question, the idea being if something comes over from the non-physical, it's not that there is a room here where things that can be manifested. Your own perception is, well, anything that you have access to. You can only manifest, anybody can only manifest from what you would consider non-physical, that they are perceiving, that they are capable of being aware of. But there is no shortage of it. Because you can create everything or teleport everything in the non-physical. That would be like saying, as an example perhaps, if you draw on a piece of paper, right? And you run out of ideas of things that you could draw. That's how you would realize that your ideas are empty, right?
Mm-hmm.
There could be nothing anymore to be drawn on a piece of paper because you have no more ideas.
Yeah,
it's not that
okay.
there's a physical object somewhere else that then gets manifested. It is not physical until you make it physical by drawing it on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
So there is an overabundance, but you have a certain limit if you can tune into it and distract and subtract from it and take from it or not. In other words, it's a safe fail mechanism.
Yeah, okay. And then do you have something you want to say or ask me?
Just remember, you create your own limitations. No matter if you're afraid that you're emptying the non-physical, which is a very humorous concept from my understanding, or connect to certain entities that they might be detrimental, or if you think you can always be connected to me and have joyous experiences, it's all your perception that makes it so.
Okay. Well, Siha, thank you so much for talking to me again. I really appreciate that you and all the other ETs are coming through and that you want to communicate with us. That is really appreciated from the bottom of my heart. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. I also appreciate your facilitation of frequency. I look forward to speaking to you or anybody else in other interaction. Much love.
Meow.
If there's no further inquiry from any individual present currently, I will connect back to Metax.
Much love, Sihar.
Much love.
Much love, Sarah.
Hi, Metax.
Oh, David might need some water. I'm sorry. I forgot to ask.
Yes. Yes.
You sound sad, actually.
Yes. During our previous interaction that I had also. As Christy persons, there also is some energies in David that needs to be processed that have a certain effect on the heart, also related to a certain feline entity. I have to work with while I'm David. It always crop up when I'm or another entity of a higher nature are speaking through, so therefore it's something I'm working on right now.
How are you processing it?
Energetically, it's a difficult explanation. I mostly connect to the heart. Of course, I also communicate with David directly and also in direction. However, it's less of an intellectually understanding process, more processing energy and frequency and to placing sadness and depression or any desperation, well, perhaps no longer desperation, but still some suppression, the aggressive energy with love. Also importantly, self-love, because once again, if you cannot really connect to any of our entities out here, if there's not love of self, also our species in general is very much emphasizing on love, including self-love, compared to your selfishness, which is something else entirely, and often the manifestation of the lack of genuine self-love. So therefore, putting entities more in a state of self-love is usually the best way, but of course, while I work with David, in order to keep the connectivity with entities such as myself, often I have to tend to everything that comes up during the process in the emotional body. And that's certainly something that's been lingering now for several, what you're considering months, and therefore several of the interaction that we have in such a manner.
So I'm sometimes wondering that people or cats in your world, you're familiar with some feelings of sadness or melancholy.
Melancholy, very much so, yes. Not depression, however. Depression is a stuckness of energy.
Yeah, melancholy maybe.
Yes. Or sadness is not the idea of being constantly down. It's more of a perceivedness of something letting go. Like, it's bittersweet, perhaps is a better term.
Yes.
Because our energy is more free-flowing and open, there's not a state of something being suppressed, which is always the idea of depression as something of energy is not expressed and being suppressed. However, if energy is more free-flowing, there can be something like sadness leaving the body, or then, yeah, something like nostalgia or melancholy, longing for something that's currently ironically and paradoxically perceived differently than how it is. However, energy then comes and goes, and there's no depression being created due to there's no holding on onto frequency.
I guess, yeah, that explains a lot.
If you accept the present moment for what it is and understand everything happens for a reason, then you can let go of any such energetic discombobulation.
Yeah, I hope you are in best place, Metax.
Well, a fine place. It's only David that I have to work on.
But you are somehow you are kind of witnessing all kinds of feelings.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just strange to think that you are kind of familiar with those sentiments.
So when I'm acting with your species, I often feel compassion. So therefore, I pick up from the frequency entities that interact with David or indirectly are sensing. And then processing those frequencies while interacting, which is also why you have experienced certain frequencies and blissful energies.
Yes.
Which is not so much about information, but more about the changing of frequency.
I had a very quick question for you. I got some crystal called moldavite, maybe probably you know it, and I'm wondering if it's any useful for meditation and communicating with entities like you.
Especially for communication, yes, it's perhaps something like a radio device, just energetically or quite physically, but not electronically.
Yeah. Is the thing I got real?
Everything in one way or the other is real, so it's a amusing question.
No, I mean like a real Moldavite, because there are lots of fake Moldavites circulating around.
From what I understand, what you're calling such and perceiving such, it is real, at least to a large degree it's real. Of course, it might be, well, dirty,
Okay.
if you understand what I mean.
Like it has to be cleansed.
It's simply not pure.
Ah, okay.
But remember, from an energetic perspective, everything is real. That's why I found the question very amusing.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, so it's actually it's like a meteorite thing. It's not something somebody just made in a factory.
Yes, which is also why it is aiding in the idea. Yes. But
Okay.
of course, also things are processed that you're considering from a meteorite in what then you consider a factory.
Okay. So yeah, so probably I'll use it sometime meditating.
And of course, you can also change the property of a physical object as was previously explained in detail.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. Yes. So it was nice talking to you, and possibly my time is up. And thank you, Metax.
I much appreciate the interaction and also the interesting questions that you have brought in and your current interaction today with me and others.
Yeah, I hope that you find it entertaining.
It is certainly entertaining, particularly your perception of reality is interesting.
Yeah, I'm glad to be of object of interest. It's nice to know
You always are.
each other. Thank you, Metax, and much love.
Much love to you. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye.
Any further inquiries?
Jacob, you're up next.
Hello, Metax.
Greetings, Jacob.
Good to connect with you again. Yeah, I'll just bring in my feline incarnation. My pet cat. Her sort of bipedal, self-reflecting sort of high density self. If you want to just bring her through, that's good. Thank you.
Yes, I not certain we can correctly connect to the entity, but
Yes. If that was a question, yeah.
greetings. I receive.
I believe Jacob may need to rejoin. Just be a moment. I think he's having trouble. Is this Myra?
No.
Okay, or just he's trying to get back into the room. Oh, actually, let's see. We may have you come through a little bit later. Is that okay? Jacob's having trouble getting back into the room.
There's a reason for that.
Okay.
Much love.
Much love.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, Jacob was having trouble. So Ryan, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Hey, Metax. Greetings.
That's right.
So, like, I don't know if you remember, but about 2 years ago, in terms of like what I call time, we were talking about the capital planet of the Milky Way galaxy called, well, that I call Treezal, and like I had asked you what the population was, and you told me it was about 1 trillion people, maybe a little bit less. And like I found that like really surprising that it was so low. Like I thought it would be a lot more than that. Um, but anyway, we didn't really talk about it too much at the time, but it's something I've always been wondering about, so I kind of want to return to it a little bit real quick. Like the reason it surprised me, first of all, was because before I had asked you about it before, like I was thinking about like what the population of Earth would be if you take the density of Manhattan and like spread it out to the entire Earth, and like it calculated out to like the population of Earth would be 14 trillion people if you know like the population density of Manhattan was spread throughout the planet. And like the Star Wars planet Coruscant, it's like 100 times more densely populated than Manhattan. You know, their buildings are a lot taller, and there's this whole like underground area. So like it seems like the population of Coruscant would be like maybe 200 trillion people or something. So whenever you told me that Treezal was only like 1 trillion, it really surprised me. But basically, like so it seems like Treezal must not be as densely populated. Like certainly not as much as Coruscant, but probably not even as much as Manhattan. Is that right? Like for example, is most of the planet only covered in buildings that are like maybe a few stories tall?
Not quite. Maybe I misused the pronunciation, the idea of what you consider trillion in the David's own language. There might be some different measurements. One moment, their idea being there being different interjections of between a million and a billion, for example. So therefore, one moment. Yes, the proof is not a correct word in David's own understanding of measurement. It would likely be a trillion in his own measurement, but it's still not too far off. So the idea being, yes, many areas of the planetary body, or what you consider inhabitable area, is just smaller. So therefore there is also uninhabited area.
Okay. So I don't know if you're able to find images of the Star Wars planet Coruscant in David's mind, but like in the Star Wars movies, like there are some buildings that are like, you know, like 500 stories tall, like, you know, just insanely tall skyscrapers. And I'd kind of asked you about this before, like how tall the buildings were, and you mentioned that there were a couple buildings as tall as the World Trade Center that used to exist in New York City, but like in general, like are there any skyscrapers that are like the ones in the Star Wars planet Coruscant, like, you know, maybe like 500 stories tall or something like that?
Very possible. Depends on your definition of a story. There's what buildings that are intersected with each other. So not that you have one story above the other, but some stories that are circling around the center, like of your staircases where you go around the center. So there's stories that are adjacent to the main tower.
Okay. But like in terms of the main tower, like how tall are those? Like are any how many, if you were to stack like World Trade Centers on top of one another, like how tall would the tallest buildings on Coruscant be? I mean, not Coruscant. I'm sorry. I meant on Treezal. How tall would they be?
First and foremost, a quadrillion, I think, is an appropriate term for your own counting. Now, then, there being I don't have exact measurement of individual towers.
Okay, do you mean like the population would be a quadrillion?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that makes more sense.
Yes, well, from David's own understanding, his own mind, there being the counting measurement being different. Again, as you might be familiar, there's a stage between a million and a billion, and again between a billion and a trillion that doesn't exist in your language.
Well, okay, like at least in English, it's like a million is, it's like one with 6 zeros behind it, and then a billion is like a million times 1,000, and then a trillion is a billion times 1,000, and then a quadrillion would be a trillion times 1,000.
I understand it. I understand. I'm just using words from David's mind, so it would be more like a million times a million would be a billion.
Okay, I got you. Jacob, if you're able to speak, let me know. I think we have like 13 minutes left, so I want to leave some time for you whenever you're able to talk. Jacob, let me know in the chat if you're able to talk. So anyway, Metax, I guess on another topic for you, like what are some of the most interesting species in the universe for you?
Well, of course, our own species is always the most interesting because the most close to home. Also, those that are not physical, they're also feline to some degree, from our understanding. So everything is connected to Felidae to some degree. It's there on your planet, like the being that tried to connect previously, that was a connector failure or likely a mismatch of frequency, was David's own mind. That there's also the idea of other entities you might consider furry-like, like lupines, for example, that we have a closer connection to some degree, but overall everything that's feline, felidae, to some degree, as you consider in your Latin language, everything that would be subsumized under that label is interesting to us because it's simply family. Of course, there are those that are peculiar to us that are just very different and strange, but we indeed find it most interesting to interact with entities that are similar enough that we can have a communication, perhaps with members of our own kind in other places that are still somewhat different due to their locality, but not that different in frequency due to them also being feline. Also, fox-like beings, anything of such a nature is somewhat relatable.
Okay.
And of course, the reptiles are very peculiar in a way that they're different, but yet still they're at least on a warlike scenario. They're relatable now that we interacted with them.
Right. Okay. Jacob, do you want to try your microphone to see if you can talk?
I understand you're also asking for more stranger entities, but then again, I'm just explaining our idea of interest here more than anything else. So, idea of interest would then be different.
Right. Yeah, Jacob, if you're able to wait, hang on, me. Jacob says he can't hear anything. Jacob, are you able to hear anything or talk?
It's also difficult, the connectivity to the entity and bridging the gap between the frequencies there due to the disincarnation, the physical incarnation, and also certain mind patterns, David, and certain mind patterns, Jacob, might result in such a upheaval of frequency, which then translates to a technological.
Okay. Well, like while we're waiting on Jacob, like I was kind of confused. Like who was the entity that you brought in, like a few minutes ago, Metax? Was that like what was that? Was that like the higher self version of one of Jacob's cats, or what?
As much as was possible, it was very confusing. Not the right word. It was difficult to bridge. It was not difficult, I cannot. An lack of overabundance of frequency to some degree.
Okay.
Like blowing a fuse, if you know.
Okay.
Also, certain
go ahead.
When I'm speaking and reconnecting to the entity, was somewhat confused with the similar with the interaction that I shared with Christy and her own and experiences and what I shared previously with Vanetta considering sadness.
Okay. Well, Jacob, if you're able to talk, like, give it a shot. But if not, Metax Alexis has a question. So Alexis, you can go ahead if Jacob's not able to talk. And bye for now, Metax. Yeah, thanks for talking to me, and much love. Talk to you later.
Much love and curiosity.
Hello, can you hear me, Metax?
Alexa, I can hear you, yes.
So all this disconnectivity that's happening at the moment has sort of brought up something that I've, I guess, repressed within myself.
Good.
So during my first pregnancy, while I was giving birth to my daughter, the umbilical cord snapped, and it's something I'd actually forgotten completely about until a psychic I saw recently brought it up, and I actually don't know how to. Well, I don't know how to process the thought, like how to accept it, because I actually feel like I have been a bit disconnected with my own daughter.
I'm back, by the way. Just sorry, interject.
Yes, I understand that you have such a reflection of disconnection, and it is, of course, also biologically motivated that if you lose the connection at that point, but remember, everything happens for a reason. So first comes intellectual or emotional disconnection, then comes the physical representation, also your own femininity there being, and your own feminine identity there being a very strong connectivity between you and your daughter, and therefore there being some, again, mismatch of your own interpretation of your own frequency, and which then translated to, well, not a necessary rejection, but physically a disconnection.
Okay. What can I meditate on to sort of adjust? Like, obviously, it's sacral area.
Solar plexus also to some degree. Self-identity in the world.
Okay. Thanks, Metax.
Also your throat communication.
Okay. I'll let Jacob have his turn. Thank you.
Much love to you and healing and self-acceptance first and foremost.
Thanks, Alexis.
Oh,
Not sure what. Hello, Metax. I have no idea what just happened. It's just the moment that
There was just an overabundance of energy when the entity tried to connect Watson and David due to the overwhelmment, due to the entity having been incarnated, which is also something. It was also due to the frequency of our kind, and particularly due to the interpretation. I won't mean to dwell further on David's own connectivity, but from your own perspective, there's also an overabundance, and therefore the entity was also shy away. So if you wish to talk to Myra or something similar, or another being, I can connect you. However, with this entity, it's likely going to be similar.
Okay, so you don't think that doing a second try will work?
It would likely result in the same consequence.
Okay. Well, I suppose
Doesn't mean that I cannot connect you indirectly, and I can share information if you have something to ask, and I can try to bridge the gap, but not to the degree that I can bring the entity through. The degree is the most that you probably could get.
Well, I suppose I'll just speak to Myra. I mean, if that works too, because I was also kind of missing her and Chang and all that. But I suppose Myra would be a better connection to make that sort of triangular relationship.
Triangle relationship sounds perfectly acceptable, but until later.
Okay, thank you many times. I love you.
Meetings.
Yeah, I love Myra.
Nice to be back.
Yeah, it's good to connect with your energy again. That was a little bit strange what just happened there before. Do you have any idea what just happened? Well, I mean, just in terms of from her perspective, if you're aware of it.
We're always connected, first and foremost. However, the entity was slightly overwhelmed with the situation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I am looking at her right now, and yeah. Well, she seems. Well, I suppose that's interesting because I have to go out into a certain room in order to even talk, and it's too cold for her to come out here right now. So I suppose it's manifesting in all these different ways. She doesn't really want to connect. But okay.
Yes,
That's
it's the idea that the entity is still incarnating, right?
right.
You understand, then therefore the entity gets confused when it's supposed to speak it the same way why it's still incarnated, also due to the limitations of this person in terms of bringing through entities that are physically present on your own world instead of somewhere else. Like a contract breach of agreement.
Well, that's very interesting in itself. So, okay.
But she's very beautiful.
Yeah, I have connected to her a little bit seeing it, and she definitely does look beautiful. I mean, all you guys do. You know, I've seen you astrally, and I thought you were an angel or something, at least because of well, you felt like an angel because of the difference in energy.
I understand beings from lower dimensionality often have the experience when they're interacting with beings up here, and very often your terms that you use, such as angel, is just referring to entities over here, so I am, if you will, an angel. Even though it's a strange concept from what I find in people's minds.
Right, yeah. Well, I'm not really on board with the concept myself either, but I definitely understand why people would think that. Yeah, and right, you're quite attractive in on your own anyway. So that's just another comment. But I suppose, well, sort of a shift in questions, I guess. Is she about the same height as you, or is she a bit shorter or taller?
Shorter.
Right. Okay. Well, that's actually what I was picking up because you're about 2 meters or something like that. Is she on Gatha with you, or is she on another planet?
In some
Okay. What did you say that again?
in some version.
Oh, so a certain version of herself is on Gather.
Yes.
I see. So because time is fluid and such.
Yes, also of course depends on what time frame you're asking. She could also be currently traveling, etc. But she has locality here.
Okay, very interesting. Okay, well, I still have questions I was waiting for her, but I suppose if she doesn't want to really full on connect, I can reserve sort of this personal questions.
It's a certain
for a later
difficulty due to her having a version of it, etc. Yes.
Okay. So, do you think it's just fine for me to ask questions about who she is and such, or is that?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Well, I was just kind of wondering why I feel so close to her. Like, this is extreme love, like a sister, or almost.
Yes.
No, you were making. Yeah, go on. Sorry, I interrupted you again.
Interrupted you first, but the idea being, yes, she is somewhat, if you will, a companion, not necessarily blood relative, but the version of herself that's not exactly her, but the version of the way you would understand it to be connected is connected to her the same way a version of you here that you are familiar with, I'm aware, can have a similar relationship as you have on Earth.
Right. Well, okay. I never actually asked that, but I did definitely pick up on that a lot with him.
Yes.
Very interesting. Well, I suppose what does she do, at least, as I suppose, well, I mean, I know that you're more of a lieutenant from Kang in his military, but is she something similar to that? What does she do as like an occupation or something like that?
Occupation, yes, perhaps more medic.
A medic, okay.
Well, that's something I was also using in terms of reference from military rank, etc. However, it's not necessarily just that, it's also related more to, well, medic, healer, whatever you want to call it, such.
Okay.
Not necessarily hands or paw on, rather, but also more in research base. But both.
Okay, well, that's very nice. Well, yeah, well,
yes,
just
education in those areas, that's the main thing. She's aware of how those functions work.
Okay, I understand. Well, just give her all of my love, and I definitely love her very much. I feel very close to her, the same way I feel close to you and yourself and Kang. So, well, not in the exact same way, but you understand in terms of the relationship's kind of different, I suppose, but like the closeness is the same.
I fully understand. I certainly processed this as far as she's currently capable of integrating those frequencies in both of her versions that you're aware for both her incarnations.
Okay, so what would happen if I sort of transitioned together? Would it just make the connection a lot easier, or would she sort of do the same thing in tandem with myself? Or?
You would not technically transition, you would just be there instead of where you are now, or just identify with the version of you that's there instead of the version that's you that's now. So therefore, you'd also perceive and identify her as the version that she is there, as she already is. You would interact with the version of her that identifies as being there.
Okay. Well, that definitely resonated as soon as you said that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I have been sort of I've noticed it progressively just have been shifting in terms of definitions of who I am, and I'm definitely noticing that there's not really a time jump in the idea. It's just simply acknowledging an aspect of myself. Oh, right. Okay.
Yes.
If you want to make any comment on that before I sort of ask further questions.
Yes, sir. Dear being, it's always about identification. That's how you
Well,
create.
Right, and I definitely understand the blockages that I'm coming through right now because the learning process and stuff just making a lot of sense because I can kind of step back and I don't really have to self-associate with them so much. And ironically, well, not really ironically in that way, mechanically speaking, but they subside. So I have been seeing myself from being more conductive to my self-identification, as you were saying before. I have been picking up on this sense of leadership that I have, and I suppose energetically I do feel quite similar to Kang, which is very interesting given what you said before about him being a parallel incarnation of mine. But if you would just like to elucidate on what it's like to have that sense of leadership for people in your collective, that would be very helpful for me.
Well, best direct with him directly, or the point being, it's really from my perspective.
Okay.
The easiest is if you would also tune to his frequency, and then you'd also see through his eyes, not literally perhaps, but energetical.
Right.
And also, you have many versions of yourself and possibilities. That's just the one that's currently the most greatest of likelihoods, because you have such an energetic attachment to it. It is great and good, and I encourage that to happen.
Well, I definitely appreciate that, Myra. Well, no, I mean, I was going to bring it through before, but I suppose you were just the greatest sort of bridge between my cat and I suppose just Gatha, and you don't understand, right? I suppose I'm not sure if I'm not sure how I'm going for time, Christy. Do you know what?
Yeah, Jacob, I didn't know if you were looking at the chat. I was just letting you know we're end of session now.
Oh, okay. I suppose I could just ask one quick question. Is that fur color still black like it is in a little incarnation form right now? No?
Not exactly the same fur color. There's more stripes and perhaps more glistening silver lining around the leg area, but the main fur color is similar. Remember, in that dimensionality, there are different colors, so there's also more intensity in different shades of black.
Oh, that's very cute. Okay.
So there's some difference in fur coloration. It's not exactly the same, but you would likely recognize.
Okay. Well, no, that's very nice. I definitely do. I agree with what you were saying before in terms of just connection to your planet.
Yes, and identification. Keep that in mind as a farewell.
Right. Okay. Well, okay. So I suppose if our time is up, I'm just a little bit sloppy in just in terms of how I'm communicating, but right, working in my throat as you've been telling me before. Okay. Well, much love to you, Myra, and much love to Kang and my cat. I'm not sure what her name is yet, but I suppose I'll figure it out eventually.
Go, Bagheera. Goodbye for now. Much love.
Well, goodbye. Love you.
From one of us.
Farewell.
Greetings.
Thank you, Metax. We're at the end of session, and thank you so much for your bringing energies through today and helping me as well. I appreciate it.
Very welcome. So, appreciation to the entire collective for the facilitation, also for David's own processing. No, but a frequency. Goodbye for everybody. Much love.
Goodbye.
Until our next interaction. Remember to love yourself. Yes.
Metax, just one very quick question. What did Myra just say? Did she just tell me her name, my cat's name, in that incarnation?
You can use, if you will, same name for your cat as in any other incarnation. Remember, names are just a point of reference.
Okay.
For now.
Goodbye, Metax. I love you.
Much love to all of you.